Well, today marks 2 years since the storming of the Capitol on January 6th.
And Attorney General Merrick Garland says the Justice Department's investigation into those riots is, quote, far from over. The department's probe into the insurrection is the largest it has ever conducted. You see some of the numbers there. More than 900 arrests, more than 950 people have been charged. And those charges range from unlawful trespassing to crimes as severe as seditious conspiracy.
Members of Congress held a moment of silence on the steps of the Capitol earlier today in remembrance of January 6th.
As we mark this solemn day, let us draw strength and inspiration from the timeless words of President Lincoln. In his message to Congress he offered in the heat of the Civil War, he said, "We cannot escape history," and he called upon Congress to honor our sacred duty to nobly save or meanly lose the last best hope on earth, which he believed was American democracy. That is our task today, too, so help us God.
Joining us now is David Becker. He is a CBS News election law expert and political contributor. He is also the executive director and founder of the Center for Election Innovation and Research.
Also joining us is CBS News chief Washington correspondent Major Garrett there in our D.C. bureau. Welcome to you both. David, one of the things I think has been underscored as we talk about what led to January 6th and what followed is that the integrity of elections and the validity of vote counting is pretty secure, historically speaking. What since January 6th, though, do you think has been the biggest change or improvement to prevent that space for people to claim nefarious things have been done?
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. And if we look back on to what happened 2 years ago, the awful violent attack on the United States Capitol, that was the culmination of months of lies being made by the losing presidential candidate, who also happened to be the president of the United States, who mobilized and tried to corrupt elements of the federal government, the Department of Justice, the Department of Defense, the FBI, to commit a coup in some ways. And that was despite the fact that election officials somehow in the middle of a global pandemic, managing the highest turnout we've ever seen, administered the most secure, verified, and transparent election we've ever seen in American history. We've never had an election, a presidential election, that was reviewed by over 60 courts. They were unanimous in finding there was no evidence of fraud that would come close to overturning the outcome. And that's because the election officials up to that time had really done a remarkable job. Election administration is an ongoing effort. There's always improvement to be made. But in 2020, the ballots in all of the battleground states were paper. All of the ballots were paper. They were all audited, confirming that they were counted properly. The courts reviewed those. And in 2022, we've seen even more improvement where those processes are getting better and better and better, especially as election officials who used to have a fairly defined, narrow job of just counting the ballots and planning polling places and that kind of thing. They're now having to do all kinds of other work, and they're getting really good at it. They're combating disinformation. They're better at communications. They're having to train their staff in techniques like de-escalation and other things that might occur at polling places. So we're getting better and better election administration, despite the fact that the lies are ongoing. People are still being incited, sometimes to violence and threats. There was just an indictment against someone for threatening an election official in Arizona this week, 2 years after the January 6th attempt. So voters should know that our system is incredibly secure. It's the best it's ever been, and it's going to continue to get better.
So, Major, to follow up on what David was saying, you know, when we think about some of these events and we look back at what happened on January 6th, it can feel as though there is not a lot of reason to be hopeful about our democracy. But, you know, you and David examined the role of the guardians, essentially, of our democracy in the book that you wrote last year, The Big Truth, Upholding Democracy in the Age of the Big Lie. Give us some perspective, because I think some folks might think if January 6th could not bring people together, what can and what does that portend for our democracy?
Look, January 6, 2021 was a national trauma, and that trauma will last for a very long time and will be absorbed in waves. And one of the waves that I think does offer some degree of optimism is the midterm elections in 2022, in which the question was sort of put before voters, if not directly, indirectly. Will you rally around candidates on a statewide basis or even in congressional districts if that candidate or nominee is a full-blown, vociferous election denier? And more often than not, and certainly in the most conspicuous places where that question was raised, the election denier lost. And in almost every case, that election denier conceded or accepted the results of that election. There is one notable example in Arizona, but in the main, the process played out. The votes were counted. Those who cast the ballots did not embrace election denialism. In fact, that was a deciding factor in many of those races, if you look at the exit polls, and the deniers conceded and accepted the results of that election, even though those results were not favorable to that particular person. That is a sign of a couple of things: that our country is absorbing the trauma of 2021 and January 6th and rendering a judgment on election lies and election denialism, and it's a negative judgment. And that those who used it maybe for short-term political gain or to raise their profile or to raise money didn't succeed. And that lack of success taught them a lesson, we hope, for the long term about meddling with the core fundamentals of American democracy. We are a country fully capable of having raucous and sometimes loud and angry debates over taxes, entitlements, border control, crime, and the like. We are not a country trained, and we shouldn't become one trained, in election denialism or using that as a tactic. And it was tried to be used as a political tactic in the midterm elections. And more often than not, it failed, and failed conspicuously. That gives me, I think, David, some measure of hope.
It's encouraging also to hear that glimpse of hope. The American people, when faced with these choices, seem to make a decision that avoids the misinformation. But, you know, many have called January 6th and what led up to it a dry run, because now you can see how to manipulate algorithms that anger people on both sides just to increase engagement. So, David, on that point, building on what Major just said, what still needs to be done to protect American democracy and prevent any other disaffected people from believing in lies they see on platforms or, you know, shared by formerly elected or currently elected people?
Yeah, one thing that Major and I point out in the book is the importance of Electoral Count Act reform. And that happened. That happened last month, and that's a very good thing. That strengthens some of the guardrails around democracy for future presidential elections. But there are two things in particular that we noted that I think we're still in the process of getting towards. There's some very positive motion happening in these areas. One is funding. There was a little bit of funding in the omnibus bill that passed in December, about $75 million for election offices, but that is woefully inadequate. That's about 25 cents for every eligible voter in the United States. And election offices are being asked to do more with less. That's been a constant thing, but now that they have to perform all of these other roles, and often state legislatures are putting more burdens on them, sometimes in response to the lies about the election, those things cost money and they need to be fully funded at both the federal and the state level so that the election officials can do their job. And then the most important thing, I think, is accountability. And we're seeing that process play out. The Justice Department is undertaking its independent investigation. I think the work of the January 6th Select Committee, providing evidence, producing evidence, conducting interviews, has been incredibly important, both presenting it to the American people and offering it to the Department of Justice for them to review that as they consider what crimes might have been committed. But as we move forward into 2023 and 2024, we're going to need to see more accountability for those that have spread these lies and incited violence.
Important work that continues. David Becker and Major Garrett, thank you both.
Sure.
Thank you.
And stay tuned. We're bringing you live coverage of President Biden awarding presidential citizens medals to 12 individuals involved in defending the Capitol 2 years ago. The ceremony is scheduled for today at 2 p.m. Eastern.